Elitism. Now there's something nobody wants to be accused of, including retro gamers. And being a retro gamer myself, I'm certainly not unbiased in the matter. It's only natural that I wouldn't want to call myself elitist. That being said, I'll gladly call myself an idiot 7 days a week, so maybe I do have a chance of answering this in a more objective way. Okay, so for starters, I think it should be said that elitism exists in almost every hobby you can think of. No joke. My mother and sister are into scrapbooking. We're talking putting stickers and pictures onto pieces of paper, and yet they've told me things can get mad gnarly with elitism. I mean, what's that all about? Usually when it comes to documenting personal memories, people just respectfully leave it alone. You wouldn't go over to someone's house and be like, "Oh, is this you and your family?" That's a bunch of baloney. Now, when it comes to elitism in retro gaming, we've got ourselves a variety of different flavors it comes in. Perhaps the most obvious one comes from the retro gaming versus modern gaming debate. This is something where I'd say a lot of us are probably at least a little bit guilty. Maybe you full-on hate modern gaming, or maybe you just prefer retro gaming, either a little bit or a lot. But regardless, when you hear somebody say they only play modern games and don't bother with older games, it may cause you to roll your eyes or make you think something like, "I don't think I want to know you anymore," whether you say it out loud or not. Personally, when I hear somebody express their disinterest or disdain for older video games, it makes me feel a certain way that I would categorize as not good. Not sure exactly where that puts me. I think the big thing with me isn't so much that people are idiots for not playing older video games, but rather I'm just not convinced that they've given them a proper fair chance, which is their right to do so, and it may just be asking too much of them to approach older games in the way that they require to be enjoyed. Also, sometimes I feel like people are just playing the newest games because that's the de facto societal norm. It's the latest thing and what's being marketed most heavily. What's new today won't be new enough tomorrow. I mean, that's what people do with everything else. I've got a smartphone that can do everything a phone would ever need to do. Runs perfectly fine, and yet because it's 5 years old, I'm considered some sort of weirdo for not using something newer. Yeah, if you're like me, you may just feel like older games get the shorter end of the stick. Even when retro games do get some media attention, with the NES Classic being perhaps one of the best examples, instead of Nintendo pushing for more sales, they basically just responded by saying, "Why do so many people even want this?" So when something you like feels underrated or underappreciated, one of the responses could be to try to elevate it. And what better way to do that than acting like you're better than someone else for liking it? It's an aggressive approach, but I can understand how and why it happens. I mean, you never see it happen with stuff that is more unanimously loved. You ever see anybody acting like they're better than other people because they like ice cream? Why bother? Practically everybody likes ice cream. You're not sticking it to anybody. But if you want to beat your chest for something like bubblegum flavored ice cream, then you are back in business, my friend. But speaking of flavors that some people find to be nasty, how about the next flavor of elitism? Collecting. Yikes. Perhaps the most obnoxious one. I feel like most people know well enough to try to avoid being guilty of this one, simply because it's such an obvious way to look like a doofus. When it does rear its ugly head, it tends to be in more subtle ways, or ways that the individual is unaware of. Remember, nobody would willingly want to be identified as an elitist. What's tricky about it too is that somebody could very well be perceived as an elitist simply for owning expensive things, when really elitism has more to do with the attitude of the individual. So let's say we're talking about somebody on YouTube. How they share and talk about the games they own could rub people the wrong way, or it may not. One thing people get accused of all the time is showing off games by having them behind them. But I mean, we are talking about video games. What do people expect? Something totally unrelated as the backdrop?
Hi, I'm Game Doogie, and today we're gonna talk about video games.
I suppose there's a proper balance that can be struck, though. If somebody has a handful of their favorites behind them, that should be okay. Whereas on the other hand, somebody could be intentionally putting their highest value items out, then try to pass it off as a casual display behind them while they put out the vibe. A lot of people will also be quick to say that those who have games graded are elitist, but I've never had anything said or directed towards me from those folks, although maybe that's just because they fear me taking over the market with my own personal grading service I've been working on. I think the reason graded game collectors get deemed as elitist is because they're not collecting graded games in order to play them, so why are they collecting them? To have something considered valuable or important? Perhaps some sort of status associated with that. Hey, I can relate. What I'll say is this: while collecting sealed games is certainly ripe for elitist attitudes, I definitely don't think it guarantees it, and in some cases, I think we just perceive them as having elitist attitudes more than they actually do. At least towards us. I don't think many of them think they're better than us, because I don't think they think about us much at all, to be honest. It's almost like two different hobbies, even if there is some overlap. If sealed collectors did have elitist attitudes, I think it would be more likely they have them amongst each other, but I'm not a part of that world, so I wouldn't know for sure. Alright, the next type of elitism would be playing on original hardware and or playing with certain equipment that is regarded as providing a more accurate experience, like CRT TVs or FPGA hardware. Here's the thing, while I personally prefer to play games on original hardware, the reasons for not are pretty overwhelming. Saving money, saving space, convenience. Okay, maybe just 3 reasons, but those are some pretty huge reasons. Also, if I'm being honest, switch me over to playing games not on original hardware and it would bother me for... wait for it. Okay, I'm good. Like myself, I find most people just really want people to be playing these older video games. How they do it be darned. I mean, it can be hard enough just to get people to try out older games as it is. Beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. If somebody is playing Super Mario Bros. Hooked up with an RF cable to an HD TV, yeah, you could make the argument that's not an ideal setup, but at least they're playing the game. I do think there's a bit of fear we have that added input lag or a blurred image could give people the wrong impression though. I think elitism with having the right setup likely comes from wanting to elevate the hobby. Well, not quite like that, but you toot your horn about how great retro games are with the right setup because it gives the hobby a higher ceiling for enjoyment that way. Or at least you think it will. It's fine to love your setup, but a problem when you put others down for not. Call it misguided passion. The final flavor of elitism is perhaps the most specific kind, which would be elitism within genres. Basically, this comes down to people who are experts at a genre being unwelcoming and or unfriendly to those either just starting out with the genre or who are maybe just not that great at it. Typically, this only applies to certain genres as well, something like fighting games or shoot 'em ups perhaps. Yeah, you typically don't see many platforming game elitists. We're just a gleeful bunch who like to jump around and have a fun time. It seems like the people who are elitist about a specific genre are the ones who take it really seriously. Not that you can't take a genre really seriously and also not be elitist about it, but it seems like the elitists take it too seriously, and that's the crux of the problem. Things like politeness and common courtesy all play second fiddle to the passion for the hobby. And if you've noticed a common theme throughout my video, this is it. Elitism comes from misguided passion. Elitists are really into something, but don't quite know how to handle it properly, which manifests itself in strange ways that can put others down. Ever see an elitist who's just sort of into something? I kind of like rechargeable batteries, but if you use regular batteries like an idiot, we can still be friends. Wait, maybe I like rechargeable batteries more than I thought. So yes, there are definitely retro gaming elitists, but I still find most people take their passion for this hobby and use it to spread positivity. That's sure as heck what I've noticed from the overwhelming majority of comments you all leave. A good self-check we can all do to make sure we're not veering towards the elitist side of things is to just evaluate what's happening with all the passion we have for our hobby. Doing nothing but having fun and encouraging conversations with others that allows them to do the same, then you're golden and just keep it going. And heck, while you're at it, try to get some of the younger generation on board with retro video games so that we can ensure this gravy train continues to keep rolling for the long haul. Alright, but for this video's question, I want to ask something challenging to answer, which would be, which flavor of retro gaming elitism would you say you're most susceptible to? As a quick recap, the flavors were retro versus modern, collecting, equipment setup, and certain genres. For me, it's definitely the retro versus modern flavor. I really gotta be careful with that one and make sure I use my passion to encourage people to play retro games, but be okay with it if they don't. Okay, so for your answers and anything else you'd like to say, leave a comment down below and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's the retro